I'm going to walk you through what just happened between the United States and Venezuela. And I'm going to do it in a calm, simple, story-style way, like I'm narrating it to you in real time. Because this event is not just another headline. It's a turning point, and the way it happened, the speed of it, and the message behind it, that's what makes people uneasy. So here's the moment everything snapped into focus. Before dawn, on January 3rd, 2026, the United States carried out large-scale strikes inside Venezuela, centered on Caracas, and then announced something even bigger. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had been captured by U.S. forces and taken out of the country. The Trump administration said Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were in U.S. custody and would face charges in New York, with Trump publicly describing Maduro's government as a narco-terrorist structure.
Please help us make 1,000 subscribers by the year end. Make sure to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and leave comments down below so I can find out what content you'd like to see, and I will reply to everyone. Don't forget to hit the bell to be notified as soon as the next video drops.
Now pause right there, because if you've ever followed U.S. Latin America history, you know why this lands like a thunderclap. The United States has pushed, pressured, sanctioned, funded opposition, and operated through intelligence for decades across the region. But this is different. This is open force on a sovereign state with the removal of a sitting head of state. And that's why the international reaction hit instantly. Condemnation, legal arguments, warnings about precedent, and fears about what comes next. To understand how it got here, I need to rewind, but I'll keep it clear. Venezuela has been locked in a long crisis, and it's not just political. It's economic, humanitarian, and institutional. Years of corruption allegations, accusations of repression, and a collapsing economy, combined with huge oil wealth that didn't translate into stable living standards, created a country that became a symbol of what happens when power hardens and systems stop working for ordinary people. The United States, across multiple administrations, treated Venezuela as both a moral issue and a strategic issue. Democracy on paper versus authoritarian control in practice, and oil and influence in the background. And then there's Nicolas Maduro himself. Maduro took over after Hugo Chavez, and over time he became the face of a state accused by opponents and many outside governments of cracking down on dissent and blocking fair competition for power. Over the years, the U.S. escalated sanctions, aiming to cut off money and pressure the government. Venezuela's leadership, in return, blamed the U.S. for strangling the economy and trying to force regime change from the outside. That standoff, pressure versus defiance, never really stopped. Now fast forward to the Trump era, because Trump's approach has always been more blunt. In this latest episode, Trump's language and framing matter as much as the bombs and the raid. He didn't present it as a limited strike or a narrow rescue operation. He presented it as a decisive act against what he called a criminal, terrorist-linked regime. And then came one of the most controversial lines. Trump said the U.S. would run Venezuela temporarily during a transition, and he talked about getting the oil flowing. That wording signaled something bigger than a single strike. It sounded like temporary control, a managed transition, and a direct link between security and resources. Now here's where the debate gets sharp. Because the moment the U.S. uses force in another country, the legal question lands immediately. Under what authority? Under international law, using military force against another state is generally prohibited unless it's self-defense against an imminent attack or authorized by the UN Security Council. Legal experts quoted in major coverage argued the U.S. action didn't meet those standards, calling it a violation of the UN Charter and, in blunt terms, an illegal act of aggression. And that legal argument isn't just academic. It affects alliances. It affects how other countries justify their own actions. It affects what rules-based order even means when a global power breaks the rules and still holds veto power in the very institution meant to enforce them. Now let's talk about how it unfolded in human terms, because the way it happened is part of the shock. Reports described a coordinated military operation that included strikes and a raid leading to Maduro's capture. Venezuelan institutions responded quickly on their side too. Venezuela's Supreme Court directed Vice President Delcy Rodriguez to assume the powers of acting president. That's a country trying to hold itself together while the head of state is suddenly gone. And then the world responded, almost like a wave. Some countries condemned the attack immediately as a violation of sovereignty. Russia, China-aligned messaging, and others treated it as proof that the U.S. acts like it's above the law. North Korea, for example, publicly condemned the strikes as a serious encroachment on sovereignty, using it to reinforce its own long-standing narrative about U.S. power. Cuba reacted with special intensity for a very practical reason. Cuba relies heavily on Venezuelan oil support. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel described the U.S. action as state terrorism and warned about what it means for the region. And Trump, in response, dismissed talk of escalating toward Cuba, basically saying Cuba is already collapsing under its own economic weight. That exchange matters because it shows how quickly one flashpoint creates another, and how leaders start drawing circles around next targets, even when nobody officially says there will be one. Now, I want to slow down and explain Trump's stance, because this is where motive and messaging collide. Trump is treating this as a win, a show of force, a removal of a leader he describes as a criminal, and a public signal that the U.S. will act unilaterally. That is consistent with a world view where power is the deterrent, and rules matter less than results. The language about narco-terrorism, the emphasis on criminal charges in New York, and the framing of the operation as justice, those are designed to make the action feel like law enforcement on a global scale, not war. But critics argue that's exactly the problem. Calling it justice doesn't make it legal, and calling it targeted doesn't erase the reality of strikes on a country's capital and the capture of its president. And then comes the aftermath question. The one everyone is asking quietly, even if they say something else out loud. What happens inside Venezuela now? Because removing a leader does not automatically create stability. Sometimes it creates a power vacuum, sometimes it triggers infighting, sometimes it provokes retaliation or a long insurgency-like conflict. And even if a transition government forms, it faces a brutal task: restoring basic services, calming security forces, repairing legitimacy, and dealing with deep polarization. On top of that, there's the global fear that this becomes a template, where big countries decide they can simply remove leaders they dislike and call it anti-terror policy. That's why legal experts and analysts warn about precedent. If the U.S. claims a broad right to strike and capture leaders under a terror label, then other powers will feel freer to do the same. That's not just theory. It's how international norms collapse. One exception becomes another excuse. And here's the final note I want to leave you with, because it's the part that lingers. No matter what you think of Maduro, no matter what you think of the Venezuelan government,
Please help us make 1,000 subscribers by the year end. Make sure to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and leave comments down below so I can find out what content you'd like to see, and I will reply to everyone. Don't forget to hit the bell to be notified as soon as the next video drops.
this event changes the temperature of the world. It moves the line of what's thinkable. It forces allies of the U.S. to choose between loyalty and law. It gives U.S. rivals a propaganda gift. And it puts Venezuelans, ordinary people, back into the position they've been trapped in for years, living inside a struggle that powerful outsiders can intensify in a single night. So when you hear politicians call this necessary or historic or justice, listen to the words. And also listen to what the words avoid. Because the real story isn't only that the U.S. attacked Venezuela. The real story is what happens after a superpower shows the world it's willing to do that, and then calls it the beginning of a transition.